My friends, welcome to episode 7 of Vibe with Venerables, 1 hour of live Dharma and dialogue where you get to talk directly to a great Venerable. My name is Meng, I'm co-founder of Buddhism.net and your host. Today's episode is very special because we have one of my dearest friends and most admired teachers, Roshi Joan Halifax. Roshi is one of the greatest Western Zen masters alive. She is the founder and head teacher of Upaya Zen. She's the author of at least 9 books. She was a social activist. She was a founding member of Life and Mind Institute, which brought science and Buddhism together, which had a huge impact on Buddhism today. But more impressive than everything I just said, Roshi spent her life caring for the dying. And even more impressive than that, Roshi used to lead yearly expeditions into the remote regions of the Himalayan mountains to deliver healthcare and medicine to the underserved communities. And she did that well into her 70s. That's amazing. Right? I mean, armchair Buddhists like me, like I talk about compassion. No, but Roshi spent her life living compassion. And Roshi is a shining example for all of us, and she's my inspiration and our inspiration. So Roshi is here today to explore this question with us. Was the Buddha a social activist, or was he a non-social activist? Roshi will speak for roughly 30 minutes and then answer your questions live. And as a reminder, this session will be recorded and uploaded onto YouTube later. So with that, Roshi, would you like to start by leading us on a short prayer?
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'm just so happy to be here and also for us to reconnect in this really precious opportunity that you have offered to teachers. So you and I share a love for His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And often he uses the prayer that I'm going to offer today as part of his teachings, usually like dedicating the merit and then sort of concluding with these 4 lines. And this is from the great teacher Shantideva and is in the text, The Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And it goes something like this. For as long as space remains, and as long as beings remain, may I too remain, to end the sorrows in this world.
Thank you, dear Roshi. So if you want to, you can start with a short meditation, or you can just launch straight into the topic, and you have about 30 minutes.
All right. Well, I wanted to actually begin with great thanks to you, which I've done a tiny bit, but always. You've been such a close friend and also a supporter of Upaya Zen Center, which again is a very powerful institution that brings together social responsibility and the contemplative path. And apropos of that, as many people know, my teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, whom I met in the mid-60s when he was in New York and became his formal student in the mid-80s, really changed my life in a time when, in the 60s, when there was great disruption in our social landscape, with the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, as a kind of push against the prevailing racism and militarism of that time, which hasn't abated entirely, as we all know. But Thai was a social activist, and I realized that one could be a contemplative and a social activist at the same time. And then years later, Roshi Glassman became my teacher. He was kind of in the sort of grit of the world, and I've been in the grit of the world for decades. And Bernie brought to me such kind of naturalness and rawness in how we can approach the Dharma as a vehicle of healing in society. And I don't have time to talk about all the gifts I realized from Bernie. I just want to share how important he has been in my own practice and in my own thinking. And then, of course, as I said, Meng and I share a relationship with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And he is a social activist, an environmental activist. And over the years, I actually first met him in the early 80s when he first came to the United States. And he gave a talk at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And the head of the cathedral invited me to a small reception. We made our first connection. And then that connection persisted for decades. And I think both Meng and I share this incredible debt of gratitude to His Holiness. I also want to thank Upaya Zen Center, which has been a kind of emergent Buddhist landscape that brings together, as I said, these two streams, the stream of social and environmental responsibility with the contemplative. But I'm proud of you, Meng. You've begun to really bring women practitioners into the stream of this program. And I want to just give you a gold star for that.
Thank you. I'm such a good boy.
You are such a good boy. And I'm just so totally grateful because women's voices now are extraordinarily important, and they have been for millennia. But we must also create the conditions where women like, for example, Rebecca Solnit, Terry Tempest Williams, Molly Crockett, and so many others, and my beloved friend Tupten Chudran, and so many other women, the platform where their voices can be heard. And also gratitude as well to all of you who are gathered here today. It's really important what we're doing as the churn of our world is becoming more intense around issues that are human-driven. And I look at this time that you're creating, Meng, as an opportunity for us to really touch into the importance of rehumanization. This is what I see as the Dharma and as so important in our era. So I'm going to invite us to just take a few moments for us to drop into the body, although we're in this two-dimensional digital reality. I wish we were all in the same physical space, and I feel also the blessing that we can access this level of connection and intimacy from wherever you are in the world. So notice this next breath that you're taking, this in-breath. And in noticing it, let go of any distractors. Maybe even shut your eyes, though not all traditions advise eye shutting, but just to get your eyes off of the screen. And let the attention rest on your inhalation, deep in the body. And on the exhale, a kind of letting go. And at the end of the exhale, that gap, that open, unprescribed space. And the next inhale naturally arrives. And let yourself rest with the in-breath and out-breath and the gap. In-breath naturally arrives. out breath. And just for a moment, you can ask yourself, what really is important now? And I hope your answer is, I really want to wake up so I can be of greater benefit to others. And maybe let your mind open to touch into a person or a situation. And there are so many situations that are really, really challenged right now. The Gaza suffering, what's going on in Ukraine. People in Kentucky whose houses have been destroyed. Families mourning their losses. Or maybe it's someone close to you. May I too remain to end the sorrows in this world. So thank you. Please open your eyes, if you will. And also just let the body be comfortable as we touch into a little bit of the question, was Buddha a social activist? And is Buddhism socially engaged? Well, I think as this series is unfolding that Meng has created, the answer to the question I'm going to ask is no. And the question I'm going to ask is there any one Buddhism? And I'm just going to answer that question from my point of view, but you can ask yourself the question, and maybe Meng will disagree. I think that's okay totally to disagree, because that's why there is not just one Buddhism. I mean, we see.
I agree, by the way.
Oh, good. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Like I say, I'm a good boy.
Your compliance is exemplary. We see Buddhism and we experience our practice, but we see Buddhism through our own eyes. We understand it through our own experience. I mean, it's reflected through our conditioning, our culture, and also our aspirations. And there are many Buddhist clubs. And bless them all. I'm in one, Meng is in one, or maybe he's in many. Maybe I'm in several. Maybe you are in several or one or none. But it's to, from the point of view of what I'm going to be touching in today, is that I'm going to explore early Buddhism briefly, because our time is quite short, but just briefly. Through the lens of my own activist heart. And also to know that, of course, if I'm a student of Thich Nhat Hanh's and a student of Glassman Roshi's and a friend of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, my Buddhism, so to speak, this little corner that I'm sitting in, which is not all the wonderful corners of Buddhism, but it reflects the influence of my own history and also the relationship that I have with my precious teachers. I also want to say, though I have a PhD, I was an anthropologist, I've done a lot of study and scholarly work in my life. I'm not a Buddhist scholar. You know, you can go talk with wonderful John Donne. He'll just blow your mind in that regard. But I'm very interested in recent Buddhist scholarship. And this scholarship, again, is, you know, within its own geography, but it's revealed some things about historical Buddhism that I find pretty interesting. And again, this is what I would notice. Not all will notice it. And in fact, I have to say, I've been quite criticized for the lens that I operate, you know, through by some contemporary individuals who think that, you know, this is not the real Buddhism, but it's reflected in the historical canon. And I think it's interesting to look at this, you know, as we face political, social, and environmental challenges that are unprecedented, except for maybe the fifth last great extinction. Now we're in number 6. And honestly, I hope the few things that I'm going to share will open up some questions about how we as Buddhist practitioners, how we might understand the role of social and environmental responsibility in Buddhism today. So quite a year or so ago, I read a really interesting interview done with Stephanie Balkwill, who's a professor of Buddhist studies at the University of Winnipeg. And in that interview, she made this really interesting point that, needless to say, I agree with, that Buddhism is not an apolitical religious tradition, even though it's seen as fundamentally apolitical, or at least espousing neutrality by quite a few Western practitioners and Western scholars of Buddhism. And in the interview, and also in her new book on this subject, what Balkwill suggests is that this apolitical perspective that we Western people, not myself, not Meng, but anyway, that this perspective actually reflects socially biased interpretations of the Pali Canon and of later teachings in Buddhism, and that it fundamentally disallows the historical realities of Buddhism as a lived tradition, not simply as a literary one or scholarly one, or one embedded in a particular cultural context. And I think this is a very interesting point of view because it represents for me the kind of privilege that is in the Western educated world related to our experience of practice and also of scholarships, where perspectives of neutrality and apoliticality make it possible for actually us to avoid the presence of social and environmental suffering, and also the necessity of social responsibility and environmental responsibility. And we do it through bypassing, and also we do it through, fundamentally, through moral apathy or moral disengagement. And, you know, the philosopher Zizek brings this argument forward. Also John Peacock, also Thich Nhat Hanh, I think His Holiness as well. In any case, what Dr. Balkwill reminds us, and I just want to also emphasize this, that Buddhist texts and Buddhist iconography have, since the very beginning, been closely associated with Buddhist practices of governance that have been undertaken in almost every Asian society in which Buddhism has been found. And in fact, Buddhism and various schools of Buddhism have helped to legitimize the power of emperors. And Buddhism has, from one point of view, provided rulers with strategies for governing their states. Well, this is hardly apolitical, as I'm suggesting. You know, and even from the point of view of Buddha's journey toward awakening, according to the account, of course, long after he was gone, but nonetheless, it begins with a prophecy that the Buddha would become either a monarch, maybe a universal monarch, or would be an awakened one. And as a result of that, you know, and no, this is the sort of legendary perspective of the Buddha, maybe not the historical reality, since I have a sense in reading the canon and also scholarly glosses on, you know, the circumstances of Buddha's birth. But in any case, you know, from one point of view, the story goes that the Buddha was sequestered in the palace by his father, who, as Balkwell has said, you know, his father actually preferred the imperial option. Well, most fathers would. And yet, what we come to understand as we track the story is that the Buddha snuck out at night and saw the four passing sights of old age, sickness, death, and that monk walking along. And he said, that man, as the monk was peacefully making his way toward whatever, but with this sense of gravity and dignity and openness, the Buddha said, I want to be like that one. And so he rejected the imperial option, and he was to seek awakening. And in that process of awakening, and you know, I appreciate the story of the Buddha leaving home, because I think a bunch of us did too. Not all of us did what our parents wanted us to do. And it's a very brave thing and to do. And it's, you know, it's an archetypal move that we see in cultures all over the world of sons and daughters leaving the conditioned, prescribed features of their family and of their society to seek a deeper and wider view. Well, I'm not going to, you know, go into the story of his awakening. You know, many of us are familiar with that, but I always found it fascinating that the Buddha actually broke from social norms by flattening out the so-called caste system that he was a part of. And he created a Sangha that was characterized by inclusivity and by a relatively non-hierarchical structure. This was a brave move on his part, and really an important one. Yes, we have the fourfold Sangha, so we see gender bias in that, and I think we're quite sensitive to that. Monastics, nuns, laymen, lay women. Women are at the back of the bus, so to speak. But that is being reorganized and rehumanized in a rehumanizing process, you know, as we speak. And as I said, Meng, bringing women to the foreground in this series is really important. So ordaining women was a really powerful move. But of course, that was facilitated by Ananda, his cousin. But nonetheless, he did it. And that is really important for us to know. So not only the caste system was fundamentally abandoned, but also women were brought into the contemplative stream, given, the opportunity to leave the secular life per se, and to come together as a sangha, as a community of practitioners. This is really extraordinary. And, I think many of you know, I do teach in Asia quite a bit, and I would say the monastic, in terms of the gender issue, perspective is still heavily in Asian society, but it's also in the Western context, opening up in a very interesting way. And of course, His Holiness and other great Tibetan teachers have really pushed forward the ordination of women in our contemporary world, and as has Bhikshuni Dhammananda, the Thai nun, who is also a very close friend of mine, who's so courageous in being the first fully ordained nun in Thailand. Well, not only did Buddha do that, but he also ordained individuals who were deemed, quotes, untouchables or Dalits. A very powerful move to bring, in the direction of rehumanization. And so women are fully rehumanized, more or less. Okay, maybe not fully. Untouchables also as well. And we see this reflected later in terms of Ambedkar and his influence in India and on Buddhism. Also, having worked in the prison system on death row and maximum security, I was inspired to do this work in part because of, for many reasons I won't go into, but anyway, the Buddha ordained a serial killer, Angulimala. And King Pasendi was very resistant to that, and the Buddha just went ahead, stood in his values, stood in the principles of rehumanization, saw who Angulimala really was, and provided the relational and view perspective that made it possible for Angulimala to go through a powerful transformation process. Really seeing Angulimala's awakened nature. So, from this perspective, I see the Buddha not only as a religious reformer, but also as a social reformer. Well, it's also true that one can read the story of the Buddha's rejection of palace life as a kind of move away from secularity, and also a move away from a political role in his society and a move into a religious life. But his renunciation is viewed by some scholars as a pathway to a system of reciprocal authority where the Buddha rules the so-called universal realm and the monarch rules the temporal, or you could say the relative realm. And these domains are seen as interconnected, or they're intersectional. So this is quite interesting, when we think about this in relation to Buddhist iconography, where Buddha is often depicted as a king. Anyway, there's much to say about the life of the Buddha, but I kind of want to jump for a couple of hundred years into another character in the history of Buddhism, really the person probably most responsible for spreading Buddhism all the way into Greece, into the Pamirs, and down, of course, to southern India and Sri Lanka. And this was King Ashoka. And his influence, not only in India, but really in a great chunk of Asia, is consequential. You know, he was a king, and he was a violent king. And he waged a terrible war against the kingdom of Kalinga, modern-day Orissa. And he was to enter Kalinga after this, sort of Gaza massacre that with a quality of barbarity. And he actually entered into Kalinga, and he saw the carnage. And he was so devastated by the magnitude of the suffering that he gave up war. And he gave up his pattern of violence. And he ended up converting to Buddhism. And so, we know something of his world through these inscriptions that are in various parts of, the area where he was concentrated, in the rock and pillar inscriptions or edicts that are found in various parts of India. And these edicts were concerned primarily with powerful reforms that he instituted that were based on ethical principles, which he, in fact, recommended in order to foster a just and humane society. Really extraordinary. So, looking at the power of Ashoka's presence in the spread of Buddhism as a nonviolent practice, as a kind of path out of delusion and suffering. And really, to quote John Lewis, a practice of good trouble. As Ashoka put into place ethical and moral prescriptions that are also part of India today, even though India is very crossed up right now, as we're aware. But anyway, I don't think India would have become a vegetarian society without Ashoka. And also, these edicts point toward not only nonviolence, but ecological awareness. And I won't go into the edicts at this point. I don't have time. But I just wanted to say, between the Buddha and his life, Shakyamuni Buddha, and his, his powerful awakening, and his invitation to others through his realization to awaken, to, end suffering, not only in the life of the individual, but also the social concerns that really prime suffering within individuals' lives and within the lives of whole societies through direct and structural violence. Very interesting. As I said, this is just one view. And it's a view that I hope is sort of interesting for you. And I know we're at 34 after the hour. I want to talk about the Chinese Buddhists in the 5th and 6th century, the teachings of the 3 stages or degrees that were a sect that had a very powerful influence, though short-lived. Not the influence, but the sect was fairly short-lived because of how, China was in the Tang Dynasty. But it was dedicated to social work among the poor and building treasure houses for the poor and so forth. And this particular school or sect had a lot of influence, particularly on Japanese Buddhism as we know it today. So, just to wrap up this, I just want to, I can't not mention Ambedkar, because Ambedkar was such a powerful influence in Buddhism today, and actually maybe I'll touch more into Ambedkar next week, since I'm talking about in the charnel ground. But this is just a teaser. I hope you'll join us next week so that we can talk about what does it mean to practice in the charnel grounds. So I think we're at that time, my beloved friend, for us to open to questions. And thank you.
Oh, now I can't wait for next week. Tell me, how does this end? This story end? So we've now entered our Q&A phase. If you want to ask a question, just use the hand raising function in Zoom, and I'll point you out and ask you to unmute yourself. So we have a question from Priya. Okay, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Venerable. I'm not sure how I should refer to you. Is it Roshi or Venerable?
Don't call me venerable. I'm already old enough. But actually, Roshi means, as Meng knows, it means old teacher, and I'm thinking it's decrepit teacher, because I'm in my ninth decade, so to speak, but still going. Anyway, so tell me what you are.
I'm Priyanka.
Okay.
I've heard so much about you, and thank you to everyone who made this happen, where I can have this conversation with you. It was really lovely to hear from you. My question is, I'm an activist in nonviolence. So I'm a nonviolent communication skills facilitator based on Marshall Rosenberg's work. And I'm also volunteering in other places. And I always wonder about this definition of ahimsa, because when it's translated into English, it means non-violence, and it just indicates an absence of violence. But I know from my own body tells me, my mind tells me that, my inner wisdom tells me that it's much more than just the absence of violence. I would love to hear your definition.
Well, that's a wonderful question. And, for me, it's not just the absence of violence either. It's the presence of love. And it also is the realization of what Thich Nhat Hanh has called interbeing. And it's the actualization. I recently gave a talk on solidarity. It's at the level of interbeing, it's this realization that we are not doing this alone. And again, that reflects this one body view of Roshi Berni or interbeing or Paticca. For me, it all comes down to love. And I'm not necessarily, I'm not talking about romantic love. And I'm not talking about soupy love. I'm talking about this quality of being that is non-separate. Our capacity to really include the experience of others into our subjectivity at a level where our subjectivity is actually hyper-inclusive, not separate from anything. And that's love for me. But what do you think? I'm curious, Priyanka, what your view is.
Yeah. I love your definition of inclusion and that understanding of interdependence. For me, it's I tell people, ahimsa is not just absence of violence, because there cannot be a vacuum. It has to be filled with something, and that something is love. But I like to call it compassion. And sometimes I always get confused. What's the difference between nonviolence and compassion? Sometimes it seems to me the same. So I'm still on that journey where I'm trying to find my definition, but it's something to do with love, compassion. But I love how you included interdependence.
So I think you've touched on something that is fundamental. Compassion is that capacity to actually attend to the suffering in this world, and to have this deep sense of concern, along with the aspiration to be of service, to benefit others, to uplift others. And that is really critical. And also the wisdom to see what will really serve, and then to engage. And it's non-transactional. That makes it non-dual. In other words, you're not operating from an expectation. This is, this direct experience of not being separate from what is. And to, Shantideva talks about, if you step on a thorn, you don't think, well, I wonder what I should do about that. Your hand goes immediately to your foot and pulls the thorn out. It's one body, what Glassman Roshi talks about, one body or interbeing, or this notion of compassion is non-separateness. Therefore, it's non-prescriptive. It's spontaneous. It's non-dual. And that is, I think, and that's what I mean by love. This the actualization of fundamental non-duality. I think that, maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, that's just been a perspective that has grown stronger in me through time. I feel that is what ahimsa is. It's non-duality. It's love.
Thank you.
Compassion.
That really, really helped me a lot to add to my definition. Thank you.
That is a beautiful definition, Roshi, because I heard compassion defined in a different way as compulsion. Like you have like no choice. You feel you have no choice but to do something. Right? So I've no choice but to help this person. I have no choice. It's a compulsion. And the way you put it, Roshi, that because it's non-dual, I have no choice because it's part of me. I have to pull out the thorn. What choice do I have?
Yeah.
And so it's a beautiful way to see it.
Well, I'm kind of amused. I never have, put compassion, compulsion together. Actually, I think that's pretty interesting. I would agree. It's not compulsion that you are psychosocially driven. It's actually you're not separate from, so you just naturally pull out the thorn. And in a way, that sense of just spontaneous response to the suffering. There is a quality of compulsion to it, but without will. That's very wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, Roshi was talking about love. Just going, after Roshi's coming back next week, but after that, we have the nuns from Shavasti Abbey who's going to be here talking about love for 5 weeks. We can
Wow.
get plenty of love. Yes. And so, next question from Jin Yang.
Hi, Roshi.
Hey, so good to see you.
Good to see you. Well, I wrote down 2 questions as you were talking. And the first question is, as a social activist and a very compassionate teacher, you have worked with some of the most fragile communities, like in end-of-life care. And you've also worked with some of the most feared after communities, like the prisoners. And I'm curious, what have you learned from working with these 2 disparate communities? That's my first question, and maybe I'll ask the second one if there's no one asking more questions.
That's a wonderful question. I started this work with dying people in 1970, and it really brought up my own mortality for, so this is like 54 years later. It's 50, I don't know, however long. So, you're living and you're coming alongside dying people, in this experience of intimacy and on their journey, and you see kind of everything that lots you don't want to see, but you're there as someone bearing witness and in support. And so, you explore existentially, but also at a kind of somatic level, what does it mean to die? And when you explore that question, another question comes up, and that is, what does it mean to live? So in this kind of most vulnerable and really incredibly powerful phase of our life, in the dying process, should we be diagnosed with a catastrophic illness and we kind of have some reflective time, there's a quality of vulnerability that is actually a quality that would be useful for us to touch into sooner rather than later. And that vulnerability is something about the sense not only of humility that we're all going to die, including me. And I'm thinking of a line from the Mahabharata where Yudhisthira is asked, he says, what is the marvelous thing? And Yudhisthira, he replies, he says something like, all around there are people who are dying, but we don't realize it can happen to us. Like, hello. To contemplate our mortality is part of what the spiritual life is about, because it brings us, in the right circumstances, more fully into life. It brings us into this sense of incredible immediacy. It also opens up, and I think of my friend, Brother David Stendhal-Rast, who talks about gratefulness. You feel so grateful for whatever you've been given. Or I think about this image of a family in Gaza sitting in the rubble, but serving a beautiful meal in the midst. You begin to feel grateful for whatever you've been given. And I also, the sense of generosity opens up, like, I don't need to bank my money or hold on to my life or accumulate all these possessions or things. Everything will go. So the real joy of the first paramita, this paramita of generosity, of letting go, of opening, of giving, and so forth. And yet we're hoarders. Our economic system is based on, we pay people to hoard money. It's called interest. Just crazy. And so, what being with dying opens up is that sensibility. But then in the 90s, and then I was, working in the AIDS crisis and doing this work. And then in the 90s, also part of the AIDS crisis overlapped with this work I entered to with on death row and maximum security. And this comes back to this theme of rehumanization. That these were all men, all of whom had murdered, some of them in just ways that were horrifying. But I never turned away from the story of the crime that they committed, even if they didn't own it. I found out, I got into the records and looked at what they had been sent up to, death row for. And, it was for me the discovery of how important it is for us to rehumanize even the most wounded and violent in our culture, even the politicians whom we feel so dissociated from, which, I'm not going to name because I want to keep working, but all of us know the names of at least some of those on that list. And to see, those states of mind are also suffering. And that is part of this process, this mandate, this imperative to rehumanize. That is our practice. So working in these two, I felt so, weirdly enough, I'd worked in the end-of-life care field for decades and still am, and still death is imminent, but also working in this other place where those people had killed others, caused others to be dead, and caused, this wave of horror in families and communities and so forth. And it was such a wake-up call for me because I did go in with biases and I came out with a gift. And that was the gift of equanimity to, and Thai talks about this in relation to inclusion. You can't send the sea pirate out of your heart. Or in reflecting Thai's teachings, you cannot send the police who beat up Rodney King out of your heart. You cannot send the president of your country out of your heart. Equanimity means radical inclusion. Means that the violence or horror that an individual has created is also suffering. And it's not to say that we don't hold these individuals to account and we don't protect society against the presence of these individuals, but we actually understand there are roots to that suffering. And that is part, I think, of our call to rehumanize all at this time, including those who are harming others, which is not to say to be, sweet jelly, namby-pamby. It means to stand in our values, to have moral character, to work for justice, but not to breed more harm. I hope that answer was, anyway, just my opinion.
Thank you, dear Roshi. That was beautiful. Again, I learned something beautiful from you today. I learned so much from you every time we talk. And what I learned today is, so a lot of people ask this question, like the four Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. People ask, why is equanimity there? It looks like it stands out. It feels different from the rest. And Roshi, you just answered it. Because in order to practice the compassion, you have to have that equanimity to accept that whatever, that crap, that whatever evil that this person has done, then you can practice the compassion. And so equanimity and compassion are inseparable. So that is a
I love how Thich Nhat Hanh translated equanimity as inclusivity. I think that was brilliant. Or treating all beings with equal regard. And there's no equanimity without loving kindness. There's no equanimity without compassion. There's no equanimity without appreciative joy.
True, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. We have 8 minutes, and Jiwon, you have the last question.
First, thank you so much for sharing your precious time and also your beautiful presence. I think in the world there's just so much suffering, and then if we want to solve it one by one, it's just endless. And there are also a lot of activities to help reduce people's suffering and also animal suffering. And recently, I heard a view from a Buddhist master. This might be my misunderstanding, but in my understanding, it was that people who are not enlightened yet, we have so much ignorance. So even though we try to help others, because of our own ignorance, actually we make things worse on the way. So rather than trying to solve everything, first prioritize your own enlightenment so that you can realize great bodhicitta, great compassion, and then with that great equanimity, you can help people better. I agree that it can be one way, but I am confused because now our earth is being destroyed so fast. So if people just prioritize on the enlightenment, I don't know if it can happen in this lifetime or not. And then I don't know if our earth can sustain. How long it can sustain, I have no idea. So I was wondering if you think people, especially Buddhist practitioners, they should prioritize on their own practice to get enlightened, or considering our current urgent situation, maybe they should, even though it's not perfect and they still have lots of ignorance, they should first prioritize helping others to prevent something very disastrous. Do you have any advice on this?
Oh, so that's such a wonderful question. And there are many Dharma doors. So for some, what is important is to prioritize their own enlightenment. For others, it is to say, don't wait. Even if you cause harm and there is moral residue, so be it. Your natural bodhicitta has arisen that you step forward to alleviate whatever suffering you are in connection with and to be of benefit to others. I am a little of the latter school, as you can imagine. Because I've interacted with so many people who are acutely suffering. And I'm not going to wait for my enlightenment to serve, I can tell you. So, but that's just my own perspective. And yes, the truth is that the outcome might not be what we really would have wanted. And that is often the case. So part of, I think, the practice has to do with doing the best that we can to serve others, knowing that we cannot control the outcome. That's just my view. Thank you for the question. I'm curious as to, why you're asking it, June.
I personally want to use a few hours on my practice in my daily life, but when I'm in my community, I just see so many sufferings.
Yeah.
So sometimes trying to help others, I skip my daily practice and I feel guilty. And then I know how I try to help others is also not the best way. So I want to know how I should live and use my time.
So I've written a book called Standing at the Edge. I actually think it might be in Korean, it might be in Chinese, I don't remember. But in any case, your English is good. So I think for someone like yourself, that book might be, quite helpful. Maybe. Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet. I just encourage you to read it because I can tell you're a person who really wants to serve, and it's how, we can meet suffering in our lives, in our communities, in the world, more resourced and more honestly.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Priyanka just very helpfully put a book in chat, so we can all look at that.
Thank you.
Okay, so we come to the end of our hour. Roshi, can you end this, close this by leading us in a closing dedication and bless all of us?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. So this actually is the 4 lines of the Bodhisattva vows that we chant at Upaya, sometimes many times a day. And it was actually composed by Chi Yi, who was the founder, not the founder, but a great scholar. It was the 8th century in the Tendai sect. And it goes like this, and this I wish for you. Creations are numberless. Vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. Vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. Vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. Vow to embody it. And then at the end of the night, after we've chanted those 4 lines, the chanter offers this for all of us. Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly and opportunity is lost. Let us awaken. Awaken. Do not squander your life. Thank you, dear friend and friends.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Friends, let's all bow to the teacher. As Roshi said, oh, decrepit. That's so funny. So I want to thank Roshi for being here with us. For those who, I mean, you're probably aware, Roshi is always very in high demand. It's always very hard to get her time, and she sacrificed her rest just to be with us. So we are very appreciative. And Roshi, I'm going to say this every time we do this. Thank you for being born for our benefit.
Well, say back to you and all of those who are gathered here.
Oh, thank you. So, friends, as a reminder,
and
this
Angela,
recording.
Thank you. Nothing happens without Angela.
That is true. So Angela is the director of operations in Buddhism.net. In other words, she does all my real work. So but she always stays
I'm glad you
invisible.
mentioned that.
That's right. So friends, as a reminder, this recording will be uploaded onto the Buddhism.net YouTube channel. Subscribe, share, and tell all your friends. And if you are inspired to practice dana or generosity towards Roshi, please donate directly to the Upaya Zen Center. And we'll be sharing the link on chat and also by email. And next week, Roshi will come back to us and talk about Bodhisattvas in the China ground. And after that, we have Venerable Tutun Chodron, who is a great friend of Roshi and myself, and then the nuns from Saraswati Abbey. So my friends, see you all next week, and thank you for being here.